Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Livy, and in today's video, I'm going to be reviewing Stranger Things Season 4, Part 1. So if you've been following along, you probably know that Stranger Things came out with the first part of their newest season on May 27th, which was actually like last night or early this morning at 12 p.m. It was 12 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So I was planning on staying up super late and watching the whole thing, like starting at midnight all the way through. And I only got to like 2:30 a.m. I watched 2 full episodes and then continued this morning to finish out part 1 of season 4. And there's going to be a few different segments to this review. The first one is going to be spoiler free, just giving my initial thoughts on part 1 of season 4. I'm kind of letting you guys know what I thought of it, but I'm not going to put any spoilers in that in case you haven't watched it yet and you want to watch it. And then the second part is going to be with spoilers. I'm probably going to break it down like episode by episode. And kind of give you guys the title of the episode, a general idea of what happens, and there will be spoilers obviously throughout the way in that segment. So, throughout the way? Anyways, okay, I didn't get that much sleep, clearly. To give you guys an overview of how I felt about Season 4, Part 1, I loved it. I'm not sure, I haven't seen anybody else's reviews yet, so I really don't know how other people feel about it. But I'm a huge fan. I will say we've waited so long for this season and they did not disappoint. It's a really, really good, fast pace, packed part 1. There's so much going on in each episode. Each episode is about an hour 15. The last episode of part 1, episode 7, is an hour and 40 minutes, so it's a really long one. But like I said, every episode is so packed. There is so much going on. I would say this is definitely the most jam-packed season yet. And I'm a big fan. I love all the different storylines and all the threads going on. And the main antagonist in this definitely has more of a horror theme than like sci-fi fantasy. Kind of previously what we've seen in other seasons. Yes, it was scary, but it was less horror-esque. And I would say that in part 1, the antagonist really is like scary, especially in the beginning episodes where you start to see how he's affecting the different people in Hawkins, the different kids. And it's like pretty scary. It reminds me a lot of like a demonic entity from like Conjuring or something else. I don't know. If you have seen the season or seen part 1, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it definitely has more of a horror element to it. And then as the episodes go on, they definitely add in that sci-fi element that we know and love so well from Stranger Things. So to give my just honest opinion about how I felt, I think this is my favorite season so far in just seeing part 1. Part 1 feels like a full season though. There so much happens and it's so well constructed that I can't believe there's going to be a part 2 coming out in July. So I'm definitely not disappointed. The wait was well worth it. And if you haven't seen it, you definitely should go watch it on Netflix. If you have nothing going on this weekend, go binge it. Like I said, I've watched it all within like half a day. And I tried to watch it really quickly to get this review up for you guys. And it's like Friday afternoon right now. So hopefully I have this up by tonight. Just so you can kind of see if you're interested in it, get an idea. If you've already watched it, then you can continue on in the video and we can talk about all the juicy spoilers together. So that is where I'm going to cut off my just general review. If you don't want any spoilers, go ahead and exit the video now and come back to catch up with us once you've seen it. If you don't care about spoilers or if you've already seen the season, part 1 of it, then please feel free to stick around. I want to hear your guys' opinion of what happened. I think I will be grabbing my laptop and going through a fandom site that has each episode kind of breaking it down. Because like I mentioned, so much happens in each episode. There are so many storylines and everybody is super involved in the show, like in every episode that's going on, that there's a lot to keep up with. There's a lot of movement, a lot of action, a lot of storyline and plot development. And so I'm going to grab my laptop so I can go through each episode, give you the title, and then also give you kind of what happened and the updates along the way. And my own opinion, obviously. So, like I said, if you don't want any spoilers, go ahead and leave now. Thank you for joining, and come back when you've watched it. And if you're ready for some spoilers and to get juicy with all the details. All right, so we're going to begin obviously with episode 1, which is called the Hellfire Club, and we'll get into a little bit of the meaning of the name of the title here in a bit. But I want to start by saying, when I opened that episode at like 12:01 a.m. last night, the first thing that comes up on the screen is a little disclaimer that there are some kind of brutal scenes in the beginning of it, especially with everything that's recently gone on in Texas. And my heart goes out to all the families and children in Texas who are suffering right now. And I appreciate that Netflix put this little blip in there saying, in light of, recent incidences and what's happening, we just want to make sure you guys are conscious that there are some graphic scenes with kids in here, and our hearts go out to you and for all the families that were affected. So I really appreciate the taste level of Netflix for doing that. I think that's really socially responsible of them. And they say, like, we've shot this over a year ago, so obviously this was nothing in line with the recent, events going on in the news. It's just part of the storyline, but they also realize that some people who might want to watch it right now might be a little bit too, everything's too fresh that they don't want to watch it. So they gave that kind of warning and heads up. And I so greatly appreciated that, because, like I said, here come all the spoilers, but the opening scene is Eleven in the lab with Papa and in the Rainbow Room. And you kind of start to see that she may have killed all these children back then. So the opening scene is very graphic. The Papa is doing an experiment with one of the other children, and he starts hearing screaming, and the main kid that he is doing the experiment with starts to see all the things that are going on outside of this room, mentally. So it's pretty graphic, but you, right off the bat in season 4, get this idea of, like, what has Elle done? Like, when she was younger in the lab with Papa, like, what happened? And what is this really dark side of her that she's pushed down for so many years? So it's this little glimpse of kind of a big overarching plot line of season 4, at least part 1, and really enjoyed that. So talking about the Hellfire Club name, the title of this is Hellfire Club, and that is the D&D group at the Hawkins High School. So it's made up of Mike, Dustin, Eddie, who is like a repeat senior of a few years. He's kind of the captain of it. And then a couple other guys, like a gaggle of guys that have a band with Eddie. Eddie is a new character that we get to meet, and he is a large part of season 4. You get to see a good part of his personality as well in the lunchroom at high school when Mike and Dustin go to sit down with him. And they're actually going to tell him that Lucas won't be at their D&D that night because Lucas is actually on the basketball team and they have a championship game. So you kind of start to see the dynamic of all the guys, and even Maxine, how they've all kind of split apart. So Lucas and Maxine are no longer together. She is going through a lot of like strife with everything that happened to Billy, and she's seeing a counselor. She's been having migraines and just is very closed off. Usually has her headphones on and really doesn't care to talk with Lucas at all. You don't see her interact a ton with Mike or Dustin either. The other big part of this episode, I don't know if I'm even going in any order within the episodes, but another big part is that we get to see Elle and Will's life in Lenora, California. I think it's like Lenora Hills, California. So we see Joyce and Will, and Jonathan and Elle all together in Lenora, California. Jonathan's story is that he's trying to get into college, and to Nancy's, Nancy, I guess, thinks that they're both trying to get into the same school. Jonathan, you can tell their relationship's a little bit kind of far apart. They're about 2,000 miles apart, and his idea really isn't to go to that same college. He's actually made a total stoner friend who's super, super funny. What is his name? Let me just check in. This guy is a hoot and a half. He brings a lot of comedic relief, especially to the beginning episodes, but he's made this stoner friend in Lenora, California, who's like all about the peace and love and just like this really goofy guy. So you get to see a little bit of Will and Elle in school. Elle is going by the name Jane Hopper now, in this high school, and the poor thing, she's bullied really hard by this mean girl, of course. I think her name is like Angela or something like that, like the very 80s stereotype, like pink pop princess, essentially. And she's really mean to Jane, to Elle. Elle brings in like a little diorama. Is that the right word? I don't know, like a little shoebox of a scene of her dad in it as like a sheriff in their cabin. And it was supposed to be like a historical figure, bring in somebody who you idolize as like a hero. And she goes up to present that, and this mean girl calls her out, like, this person isn't historical, and like, he isn't even famous. And she's like, it's my dad. And she starts to tear up. So you see a glimpse of Ella's really like treated badly at the school by these mean kids. It's so like stereotypically like 80s bullies, like the jock bullies, you know, like the cool kids. And later on, there's a scene at a roller skating rink where Elle gets embarrassed by these people. Mike is in town for spring break. He's come to visit Elle, and this girl and her friends are super mean to her, and Elle lashes back. So we will get back to that. But yeah, this is the first episode. We kind of get to see a glimpse of what everybody's been doing for the past like 6 months or so, kind of where life has evolved for each of them. We also get a quick introduction to Chrissy, who is like the cheerleading captain at Hawkins High School. And she is the person that all the stuff starts to brew up. So she's dating the star of the basketball team, who's kind of this like blonde jockey guy. And she is starting to have some like headaches and visions. And she's getting really scared. She actually goes to Eddie, you know, the longtime senior who also deals some drugs. And she says, like, you know, what do you have? Is there anything you have that's stronger than pot? She goes to his trailer later that night, and that's where shit hits the fan. So kind of a recurring theme of the visions that each of the kids see that are having problems with this upside down entity is a giant like clock. So like a big, tall, it's not a cuckoo clock, but like a big, tall, like grandfather clock. You hear that ringing, and then different things that you fear start to come up, and the entity is really feeding off of each person's individual fear that it can latch its hands onto. And kind of the recurring theme is that it's latching onto people who have had like trauma in their life. One of the traumas for her was that like her mom, it seemed like, was abusive. When she had these visions of like the clock, she started to also like be transported back into the place where her mom was like sewing her cheerleading costume, saying she's going to let it out a little bit, make it a little bit bigger, and starts like yelling at her. And just, you get the idea that her mom was abusive. So like I said, she goes into Eddie's cabin, and that is where she goes fully into the vision. We get the first, I'm pretty sure that's the first glimpse at Vecna, which is the upside down entity. Very scary looking. Does not look like, it looks similar to entities we've seen in the previous seasons, but it's a lot scarier. I would say it has a lot more horror to it. It is like a fully dressed, like slimy, bald, tall, muscular, like skeleton with gray muscle on it pretty much, and like a carved out skeleton nose. So you know how you see a skeleton and we don't have that cartilage on it. So it's got this really creepy like look with these, you know, I think they're like blue eyes. And she's in her kind of like transported in her vision while she's standing in Eddie's trailer. She levitates off the ground, and her bones all break in like the opposite way. So if your arm can, you know, it goes like this, hers breaks opposite like that, and her whole body just kind of like contorts and freaks out, and she dies. And I think her eyes like bleed. They might be like removed, or they're bloody. There's something weird with that. So Eddie sees this happen, runs away. Throughout most of part 1 of the season, he is fleeing from the police. So poor guy who's friends with, you know, Dustin and all of them, they end up finding out what's happening, but he is really on the run. He saw this happen firsthand, and he is frightened. Okay, so moving on to episode 2, Vecna's Curse. So Vecna is the name of the entity that is torturing Hawkins currently. And we do open up in this episode knowing that Hopper survived the fire at Starcourt Mall. So we learn that he's alive, and he's actually been taken to like, I think it's in Alaska, but it's like a super wintry like Russian jail, like a camp almost, where they have to work on like the railroad outside, and it's really cold, and everybody speaks Russian there. And he is trying to make a plan to escape. And I'm pretty sure it's in this episode, we get introduced to Murray goes to see Joyce because Joyce gets a doll from some place in Russia. It's like a Russian doll. Within it, it has a note saying that Hopper is alive. She calls the number on this like note that's, you know, put together with little letters from magazines and stuff. And she gets pretty much on the phone. She gets one of the guards from the jail who's like, I'll make a deal with you. You bring $40,000 to Alaska tomorrow, and I will find a way for Hopper to become unstuck. So they figure out like, oh, this is a guard at this prison, and he's going to kind of strike a deal and release Hopper. So throughout him and Hopper's interactions, you see him kind of like get real mean with Hopper and then take him away from the rest of the guards and then be like, okay, so here's your plan. You know, she's going to pay this amount of money and I'm going to get you as far as I can, but it's really up to you, and you don't stand a good chance of getting out. But here's kind of the 411 of what you need to do. So we learn that he's alive. Joyce learns that he's alive. Murray's skeptical, but he's like, okay, let's just go with it. Like, he goes and flies to California to see Joyce, and he's like, all right, let's just go get him back. This is like a bribe deal to get him. And if he's alive and if this is true, then we're going to do it. So they quickly scrounge up the 40,000. We don't even see how Joyce does that. But she tells the kids that she's, you know, she tells Jonathan, you're in charge. And Will and Elle and Mike, who's visiting for spring break, they're like, okay, guys, be good. I'm going on a conference, because she sells like Britannica encyclopedias now. So she's like, I'm going on a conference for work. I'll be in Alaska for a day or two. Like, so random. Who would ever believe that? But whatever. So Nancy is part of the newspaper, one of the school newspapers. And she has a little colleague, Fred, who's like this nerdy guy that continually like bothers her about her and Jonathan not being as close as they used to. I don't know if he like was trying to swoop in or what the deal is. But they go and visit the trailer park where Chrissy died, Eddie's trailer, who happens to actually live right across the street from Max, or like across the little park from Max. So Max kind of had the idea, like, something weird happened the other night. You know, the lights were flickering. I got a strange feeling, and I could be coincidence, but I have a feeling that it wasn't Eddie that killed Chrissy. It could have, something else has come back to Hawkins. So Nancy and Fred go and visit the trailer to kind of get the scoop on it. They lie to the cops saying like, oh, I'm going to visit my friend Maxine. Like, I need to take care of her, make sure she's doing okay during this tough time. And during that time, Nancy's asking questions a little bit and talking to Eddie's uncle just to get an idea of like what could have happened there. His uncle brings up a story, which becomes a large storyline later down the road. But because of the state that Chrissy ended up in, the way her bones were broken and her eyes were like removed and just bleeding, he remembers back in like the 50s. I have to think of the name of who that person is. He remembers back in the 50s, somebody named Victor Creel, who is put away for killing his entire family. He lived in this really beautiful, like, I want to say Victorian style house. And he's known for like murdering all his kids and his wife and taking their eyeballs out. And he tells this to Nancy, and he's like, I don't know if it's just a weird coincidence or whatnot, but the way this girl looked was very similar to how Victor Creel's victims looked. So while Nancy's getting this information, her little colleague, Fred, starts to have similar things happen to him that happened to Chrissy. He starts to have visions. You start to learn that he's got a backstory where I think he was in a car accident and accidentally killed somebody and has never fessed up to it. And that is part of his visions. He goes missing in the woods, and essentially the same thing happens to him that happened to Chrissy. His body contorts. I think his eyes are removed. They're bleeding. And he levitates right above like a road, one of the country roads near there, and, you know, breaks apart. This entity says like, you no longer have to suffer, like, let me take over. And it's killing these kids. So it kills him on the spot right there. And Nancy's still looking for him in the trailer park. Okay, now switching back over to what's going on with Mike and Elle. Elle no longer has her powers, which I think, didn't we learn that in the last season at the end? I'm pretty sure. So 6 months later, she no longer has her powers anymore. This girl, Angela's being really mean to her at the skating rink when Mike goes to visit. And obviously Elle wants to pretend that everything's good in California. And Will is like, tells Mike, like, that's not true. Like, she's getting bullied a lot. She's having a really tough time here. And Angela throws like a milkshake on her in front of everybody in the middle of that roller rink. And Elle ends up taking a moment to breathe and then actually picks up a roller skate and bashes Angela in the nose with it. And I'm like, girl, violence is in the way, but hell yes. This freaking pop princess brat is so mean and like vicious, 100% deserved it. So Elle does that. And everyone's standing around the ring, like this girl's nose is broken and bleeding everywhere. And everyone's like, oh my God. And Mike's like, what did you do? And just brought Elle back to that place of when she was younger in the Rainbow Room and like killed these kids. We get that glimpse again. Like, you are a monster. You're not a superhero. You're a monster. That's how she feels. And Mike obviously didn't have an intention of making her feel that way, but he just got into town and didn't really know that all this bad stuff was happening to Elle. So Elle becomes very closed off. And we learn a little bit more about how Mike hasn't said like, I love you to her, and she's been very affectionate, and now she thinks that he thinks of her as a monster. And as they kind of have this fight, the police come and have a warrant to arrest Elle for breaking this brat's nose, which, I mean, like I said, shouldn't have done that, but she definitely earned it. So they arrest Elle. She's supposed to go to like juvenile court pretty much. And we'll come back to that storyline, but she doesn't end up going. She gets arrested, she gets in the paddy wagon, and as she's driving away, some people stop the paddy wagon and like, they're like, FBI, we'll take it from here. So we'll jump back to that in a couple minutes. Okay, I so am not going in order. I know I'm not, guys, and I was gonna go by like, by episode, but there's so much. So I just want to catch you up really quick on Robin and Steve. They work at Family Video together, which I love. I love that it's just like, the like nostalgia tropes, like they worked at like an ice cream shop and now it's Family Video, which if you don't know, Family Video is like Blockbuster. Like I remember we had one in Indiana, like near Indianapolis, and it closed just a couple years ago. But they work at Family Video, and I forget how they get approached. I'm pretty sure Dustin and Mike go to them because Dustin's friends with Steve and say, like, and Maxine, they say like, this is happening again, something is wrong. And they all band together to let each other know kind of what's going on within town. Then they bring Nancy in the loop as well. Robin and Nancy kind of become friends, which is really fun. And I'm really enjoying the development of all the kids in that group, So like in the beginning, I think it's the first episode, we do see Robin who has a crush on one of her like bandmates, Vicky. And she wants to talk to her and stuff, and she like is afraid to. So you get to see kind of a cute glimpse of that. And then we also learn about like everybody thinks Steve and Robin are dating, and Steve's like, we're not dating, like, but she's not out really, so they don't tell anybody like the real reason and stuff. But he still has a crush on Nancy, obviously. So there's just a fun dynamic between all of them, and Nancy and Steve and Robin kind of become like the babysitters or like the ringleaders for the group. Dustin and who is it? It's like Dustin, Lucas, Max, and Nancy and Robin and Steve. So it's a big group of people. Eddie also gets added into that group later as well when they're trying to kind of like keep him concealed from the police. So like I mentioned a few minutes ago, as Elle is being transported to like juvenile hall, she gets stopped and some people take over. And we learn that it's Dr. Owens who like dealt with Elle back in the day and kind of helped her manage her powers. He knows that her powers have gone away and disappeared, and he thinks there's a way to bring them back. So they intercept Elle and bring her to Papa, actually, and a machine called Nina. So it's a big location where Elle has experiments done on her, and to kind of jump ahead and let you guys kind of know what happens is she tries to get away from Papa. She then realizes that she really needs to like cooperate because she got just a glimpse of her powers back after kind of being harnessed by her memories. And so Papa's like, let's just continue down this road. We're not going to bring everything up at once, but we're going to bring up some memories and see if you can really harness them, because these are things that you've tucked down really far away. And I think if we can bring them back slowly and build up your power, you're going to get it back and you're going to know how to use it again. So she ends up complying with that, and we see a lot of glimpses. It is a little, I would say, confusing, but I understand why they did it this way. But we see glimpses of Elle in the Rainbow Room as like her age now, and then she'll look in like a two-way mirror and it'll be a younger version of herself. So you kind of get the idea that everything that she is reminiscing through is from previously, like when she was younger and when all this shit went down. And you see the way kids were really mean to her. They beat her up because she was one of the strongest there, and that's why she killed them, I guess. And you see kind of how her actions took place and how she was treated, you know, back when Papa was training all of them in the Hawkins massacre. So, or Hawkins lab. And now jumping back over to what's going on with Maxine. So like I mentioned, she was having headaches and starting to feel weird that something was back in town. She actually starts to have visions just like Chrissy, the cheerleader that died, and Fred, the newspaper guy that died as well. And she realizes timeline, like they've met with the counselor, they have traumatic events, they started having migraines. Within a day of their visions, they died. So she's kind of on edge that something bad is going to happen. And she tells, Dustin, Lucas has decided to rejoin the group again because he realized his basketball friends who are hunting Eddie, the guy who they think killed the cheerleader, he realizes like Eddie didn't do it. He knows about all the supernatural stuff that goes on in Hawkins. So he joins up with them again. And obviously Lucas cares very much about Maxine. So Steve and Maxine and Dustin and Lucas are all together, and the guys are supposed to keep an eye on her because she's kind of floating in and out of these visions. And at the same time, Robin and Nancy go to the insane asylum where Victor Creel is, the person who killed his family back in the 50s, where all of these similar deaths started to happen, and they're all coming back up. So they kind of make a plan to say that they're studying, they're psychologists or something, studying behavior, and so they want to speak with him. They just lie to the gatekeeper guy there, pretty much. And they chat with him. He lets them know that there was something in the house, Vecna, the entity, that controlled his family, and he was seeing visions, and it killed his wife, and then it killed both of his children. And after he was pinned for it and put away, he kind of scratched his eyes out as well. He wanted to die and join his family. Nobody believed him that there was something in another dimension that was coming in, another plane that we can't see, that was affecting what was going on. He also mentioned that whenever something bad was happening, music would play, and it was his favorite song, and that would bring it all back to goodness. Things didn't take place. So what the girls gathered from visiting him was that, okay, music is really important. If somebody's in a vision or something, that's going to help them get out of it. So they're in the cemetery. Maxine, Steve, Dustin, and Lucas. And Max is just reading a letter to Billy's headstone. And while she's doing that, a vision comes up of Billy, and she enters that, the upside down again in this dark place, and everything starts to get really twisted. The guys try to wake her out of it, and her eyes are just kind of rolled back in her head, and she's not coming out of it. As she's running farther and deeper into the upside down, or to this realm, she runs into Vecna, the scary, muscular, gray skeleton creature. And she sees tree stumps of Chrissy stuck in one of them, Fred stuck in another. They're trophies of what Vecna has taken already from Hawkins. And she starts to, as she's running through this, she sees them, and there's just weird different elements in this place. It's all very red and foggy. But he's like chasing her, and he's like, I can't believe you made it this far into kind of like his lair, his house, essentially. And he captures her and is choking her out. And as he's doing that, Dustin gets radioed from the girls that they need to play like her favorite song, and it'll help open a gateway back and kind of bring her back so she can get out of the upside down and come back into her body. So they put music on her ears, and I would say this, I think it's my favorite part from the whole season. Her favorite song, we hear it once before in an earlier episode, but it's Running Up the Hill by Kate Bush. Is it Kate Bush or Katie? I don't know. It's an amazing song. If you ever heard it before, it's just like got vibes to it. And so they put the headphones on her and the cassette tape, and she's listening to this, and you start to hear it and see her in her like vision of what's happening, you know, in the other dimension. And she's being choked out by this, but she can see farther away, like an opening in clouds where she can see the guys, and she can see her body levitating above them. So she sees her physical form there, and she's able to like cut this like Vecna's like neck arm thing and get out of his like entrapment and run towards this opening in this like all this red fog, this clearing where she can see the outside world. And just the song with the emotion of her like running and just chasing after that, like to get back to herself and get back to the people who love her. It's so good. I'm pretty sure it's like the end of season 4 or episode 4, excuse me. And it's just epic. If you've seen it, you know how epic it is. Like, it's amazing. So she ends up coming back into her body, and they realize like that actually works. So she kind of, throughout the rest of part 1, she's got headphones on playing that song because it's like bringing her back. Whenever this thing, you know, she starts to feel weird, that music triggers her back into like her best self, essentially. So like I said, Vecna targets people who have had traumatic experiences. Obviously, Max has had a ton of them, and so he is kind of targeting her as his next victim. So that was, okay, so let me just back up really quick. That was Dear Billy, episode 4, that I just ended on right there. Episode 3's name is not coming to me. Where is it? Like I said, I'm on my, The Monster and the Superhero. So again, how Elle feels like a monster for what she's done in her past, and then what she did to Angela. That's how that storyline kind of comes up, and she has that fight with Mike saying that she's a monster, and that's the way he's going to view her. Moving on to episode 5 of 7 of part 1. And the Nina Project. So we already kind of touched on this a little bit, where Elle ends up going to the laboratory where Papa is, and in this machine she does kind of the like water tank, the sink tank, what are they called? Sensory deprivation tank. And she's starting to see these memories. So I already touched on that, where she's starting to see her younger self being played back into these memories as an older person now, and what actually happened, and starting to remember them, and how she came to be, and how she had her powers, and then kind of the physical action she took against the kids at the Hawkins lab, and how they ended up dying. Jumping back over to the kind of side storyline of Joyce, Hopper, and Murray. So Joyce and Murray go and meet somebody named Yuri, who's supposed to be like the small pilot, like small plane pilot, to go pick up Hopper. And he is kind of a scummy guy, and he's just this like goofy Russian dude who likes to make jokes, but he essentially says like, you know what pays more than people who want their friends back? Turning in these Americans that the KGB want, and turning in the security guard of the prison, and I will get paid more for this. So he pretty much outs the security guard. Hopper, who had escaped the prison, is found by these people at like the secret location he was supposed to go to. This plane pilot knew of the location, so he tells the prison, they go and find him, and he gets paid for that. And then he's also like, I'm going to capture you guys and bring you to the KGB. So I'm gonna get paid extra. I'm gonna make the most money out of this. And he pretty much just double crosses them all. And he puts Joyce and Murray on a plane to go take them and turn them in, during which they break out of their like bindings and turn it on him and say, you know, are able to kind of take control of the plane. And Murray's been studying, I'm pretty sure, karate. He's a black belt in karate now, which is hysterical. He is another just comic relief. Like, he is hysterical. So he takes over the plane and they turn it back on this guy and they're like, you need to bring us to go save our friend and then we will let you live. Like, we won't leave you out here to die in the cold snow. So that's fun to see them kind of take back over. And like I said, Hopper and his like Russian security guard, Russian prison guard, are in a cell together. You learn that everybody like in this quadrant, this cell, is going to be fed to like a monster. So they have a really nice meal like the night before. And Hopper says in English pretty much like, I've seen this monster. They're not feeding us because they want us to be healthy and fight it well. They're feeding us so we're nice and plump for this monster to stay hungry. And the Russian security guard, you know, prison guard, translates it for all the Russian inmates. And they pretty much learn like, oh my God, we're going to be fed to this thing. So yeah, that's not looking so good for Hopper and the guard, whose name is like Enzo, I think, something like that. Now jumping back over to Jonathan, Mike, Will, and their stoner friend, whose name is slipping my mind right now. Really long hair, just the goofy guy I talked about earlier. When Ella's picked up, when she's in the paddy wagon, and then she gets stopped by Dr. Owen's team and taken to the lab, to the Nina Project lab. At the same time, a couple like officials go to Joyce's house, and obviously she's out of town, so Jonathan's in charge, and they cut off the phones and they say, you guys need to stay here, it's for your own safety. Like, Elle sent you this letter. She gave a letter to give to Mike, and Mike just feels very resentful that he didn't say important things to her and how much he loves her, and he really wants to make this right. So the boys decide that they're going to find out, they're going to break out of the house and find out where Elle is. So they order a pizza from the stoner friend because they're like, he's got a van, he'll drive us wherever we need to go. We're going to find out where this experiment's being done and go save Elle. As we think that the pizza delivery boy arrives, the stoner, some other military officials are actually arriving to kill the people that are looking after Jonathan, Will, and Mike, and I think kill them. You can't really see because they end up getting away. The pizza boy shows up, they jump in the van and they're like, drive, drive. And they actually have one of the officials that was babysitting them with them who ends up dying in the car ride. And they have to bury his body, which seemed very dark for Stranger Things, for a bunch of kids to be burying a body in like the desert. But I mean, they didn't kill him. The other like military officials shot him. You know, it's kind of like FBI versus military and who's on the good side, who's on the bad side. That's very skewed throughout like the middle episodes of part one. So in being in Jonathan and Will and Mike's shoes, it's like, who are the good people? Like, I would have no idea. So they're confused and they're just trying to find where Ella is. They end up visiting Dustin's girlfriend, which her name, I don't remember her name, but you guys know who she is. You see her in a couple earlier episodes where she like changes Dustin's grade from like a D to an A or something. So she's really good and smart tech, like techie and computer smart. And so they go there because they find what they think is a phone number that one of the officials, as he was dying, the one they buried, gave them a pen, and they broke the pen open and found like a phone number. They called it and they're like, this sounds, to me it sounded like a fax machine. But they're like, this sounds like a computer. Like, I think this is like an IP address or something. So they go and visit her because she's super techie and she finds out exactly where this like lab is. I think like the pinpoint location of Elle. So they're like, okay, we're going to Nevada, somewhere in Nevada. I think it's like Ruth, Nevada or something like that. So jumping back over to Eddie, before he links up permanently with Dustin and Steve and that whole group, the basketball boys do find his location. He's like hiding out in like a boathouse of his like drug dealer friend or something. And he's like on a boat trying to, swim away from them. And a couple of the basketball guys jump in to the water and start swimming. And one of the guys, who was not a main character really, we had seen a couple like previous visions of him having like seen the giant clock, and he ends up being taken over by Vecna while he is swimming towards this guy in the water. So you see him, the main basketball guy who's been claiming that Eddie killed his girlfriend, Chrissy, the cheerleader, and Eddie see this guy levitate out of the water. All his bones break in weird places, and his eyes, like everything that happened to Fred and Chrissy, the two other kids that died, happened to this kid. So after that, the basketball player thinks that Eddie is like a cultist, very like Charles Manson style. He thinks that like he has summoned the devil, and that's who's doing all of this. And he goes into like a town meeting saying like, Eddie's just part of it, there's a huge cult in Hawkins, that's why all this weird stuff happens, and the devil's here, and we just need to like excommunicate all of that, pretty much. So that's kind of the development with that. It's interesting to see, like, if I had seen that, and I mean, Eddie is clearly scared. If I was a basketball star, I'd be like, he has no part of this. Like, you can tell that he's just as scared by seeing all this happen. And how could he make somebody levitate? So I guess in that basketball kid's mind, he's thinking, okay, so this is something like dark spiritually. So, okay, so to talk about episode 6, The Dive, I know I've already dove into it a little bit, but the biggest part of this episode is probably at the end, where Steve, Robin, Eddie, and Nancy are out on a boat, and they realize where the previous basketball player had died. Where this has taken place has probably opened a gateway from the Upside Down into their world, into real life Hawkins. So what happens is Steve decides to dive down and see if there is a gateway down underneath in this lake. And he does find one. He comes out in the Upside Down, and Nancy, kind of going to episode 7, you find out that Nancy, Robin, and Eddie have followed him there, are fighting off these like bat-like creatures that are attacking them in the Upside Down. So the 4 of them are kind of stuck in the Upside Down going into episode 7. And this episode is an hour and 40 minutes long. It is so jam-packed. So let me just get into it. Like I said, they're in the Upside Down. To kind of tell their storyline, what they realized is Nancy has guns in her room, and since Upside Down is kind of a replication of Hawkins, they decide to go to her house and find her guns. When they get there, they realize that the Upside Down is actually back in time. The last entry she has in her journal when she goes into her room in the Upside Down is from when Will went missing. So that gateway kind of opened in the world when Will went missing, like 2 years prior, 2 or 3. I think it's 3. And her guns aren't there because she didn't need them yet, and her room is different. And Steve realizes he can hear Dustin's voice while they're in the Upside Down in Nancy's house. And the reason is because Dustin, Erica, who's Lucas's little sister, and Lucas are all in Nancy's house at the current time. So the way they kind of find to communicate is similar to how Will communicated with the Christmas lights. Nancy decides that, or she finds out that she can kind of like hit this chandelier and talk in Morse code. And so Eddie, I think, is the one that knows Morse code. So he ends up talking to Erica and Dustin through Morse code in the chandelier and the lights, and how they can tap it and make it brighter and, dimmer. So they kind of let them know they're in their house, but they're in the Upside Down. They're in Nancy's house, but they're in the other dimension. So switching back over really quick to what's happening with Hopper and Murray and Joyce, and Dimitri is the name of the security guard, the like prison guard that's trapped with them. So what happens is Hopper and Dimitri and the other cellmates have to fight off the Demogorgon, and Hopper has stolen like a lighter from one of the security guards, and he ends up like lighting a torch and fighting it off with fire, because he knows that's like the biggest weakness of the Demogorgon and kind of their only chance to live through this. So he fights it off with fire, and he ends up being reunited with Joyce and Murray, who were pretending to be, Joyce was still supposed to be kind of the American prisoner, and Yuri, who was the plane pilot, is kind of being set up as the other American. He's all tied up, so he's set up as the other American, and Murray was pretending to be one of the Russian, essentially he was pretending to be Yuri so that he could turn them in to this prison. And so that's how they kind of break in and end up saving Hopper. Once Dustin and Erica and Lucas find out that they're able to talk to like Nancy and that whole group that's in the Upside Down, Dustin grabs a light bright, which if you guys know what light brights are, they are like a little kind of, it used to look like a small computer where you could stick like little different colored pins in that would light up and spell different things. So that's how he ends up communicating with that group in the Upside Down. And Dustin realizes that different gates have opened between Hawkins and the Upside Down where different murders have happened. Around the same time, they realize that Vecna is like a soldier, kind of for everything going on in the Upside Down. He is very, very powerful, and they start to kind of figure out, okay, what's his backstory? How is he so powerful? What's going on? At the same time, the show that episode cuts a lot to what's going on with Eleven, which throughout the season, throughout part 1, we've seen younger Eleven interacting with an orderly from the Hawkins lab. And he's kind of befriended her and told her that she reminds him of somebody called Number One who's no longer around. And it comes out throughout episode 7, we learn this orderly was Number One. Not only was he Number One, he is the son of Victor Creel, who lived in the Victorian house. Victor, killed his family. He had a wife that died, a daughter that died, and a son that died. We learn that Number One, this orderly, who is Victor Creel's son, started to have powers when he was younger, living in this house. And animals that started to die around the house, his mother kind of realized that it was him that had these powers. So he ended up killing his mother and then killed his sister, and was so powerful he weakened himself, actually, and that's why they thought he was dead. Dr. Brenner found him and started to do experiments, and that's how he was named Number One. Not only is he Number One, but he's Vecna. That's how this all ties in. This entire season ties in. He was Number One. He was good. It seemed like he was trying to help Elle when she did escape from the lab. In time, he has turned and become kind of a vessel in the Upside Down, and he is Vecna. That's how he has ties to Victor Creel. That's how the way he kills is in the same manner that had happened to everything that happened in the Creel house. So when Elle is younger, what happens is Number One, Vecna, the orderly, is trying to convince Elle to go with him. He is against kind of what Papa is doing there. And like I said, he's befriended Elle and realized that she's very strong. She refuses to go with him. And essentially she creates a portal, a gateway to push him into the Upside Down. And that's where he turns into Vecna. So like Storm happens and he's transformed into who we see as the monster Vecna now. It's so insane to see the connection of everything. Like, I can't believe how the writers of Stranger Things actually created this season. Like, it's just nuts. The complexity. I did not see Vecna. Obviously, I knew he was tied to Victor Creel. Everything happens in the house that Victor lived in with his kids. I did not know he was going to be Victor's son, Henry. No clue. I did not know. I think in my mind, I was like, okay, maybe the orderly would have some tie to, you know, he's called himself, or he kind of alluded that he was going to be number one. I didn't know how number one tied into Henry Creel, Victor's son, who then became Vecna. The complexity of it is so extraordinary. I'm just blown away that this season is what it is, and it's only part one. I think there's only a couple more episodes, but hopefully they're lengthy episodes and we can continue to see more. So I'm really, really excited that I binged this part one today. Hopefully you guys are seeing this review, you know, as soon as it comes out. If not, I hope I didn't ruin anything for you. Like I said, I think this is my favorite season so far, even though it's just part one. I love the horror. I love all the horror elements. I love that Vecna is creepy and like scary. I love that the Creel house is like a creepy haunted house. I loved seeing Nancy and Steve and Robin and Eddie all in the Upside Down in Nancy's house, and it was years prior, but they're still able to communicate currently with Dustin and Erica and Lucas in Nancy's like now home, you know? I loved getting to see the backstory of Elle and how she thought she was a monster and like thought she was remembering these things correctly in this massacre. And really she was protecting herself and doing what she thought was right. So she really wasn't a monster. I'm interested to see, now that Hopper and Joyce are reunited, what happens and how they find their way back to Hawkins. That's the other thing is Dr. Brenner, Papa, and Dr. Owens were kind of retrying to train Elle's strength to send her back to Hawkins, because all this shit started to stir up again, and it was in the newspapers and stuff. You know, they were hearing of what was happening. So I've talked for so long, guys. It's been like an hour-long video. If you're still here, thank you so much for hanging out with me. My mind is just like a scramble because there was so much packed into this part one season. But I'm really happy I watched it, and hopefully I covered like important parts. If I left some out that you think are super important to the storyline and you really enjoy, comment them down below. Feel free to comment your favorite part of, or favorite even episode or part of an episode that you've seen so far. And I'm excited I will be reviewing part two when it comes out in July. I think it's like July 1st. So thank you guys so much again for tuning in today, and please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. We just hit 300 subscribers. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.